I've always enjoyed camping, especially alone. There's something freeing about being surrounded only by nature, far from the noise of people and obligations. After ending a 5-year relationship, I felt like I needed some time to clear my head, so I decided to spend a weekend solo camping in the forests of Washington. It wasn't my first time camping, but it was my first time doing it after months of feeling completely lost. I arrived early in the afternoon, under the region's typical gray sky and the damp, earthy smell hanging in the air. I picked a spot far from the main trails, well away from any other campers. I wanted silence, just me, my tent, a campfire, and the towering trees around me. The day passed uneventfully. I set up my tent, gathered wood for the fire, and spent some time reading an old book I'd brought. As the sun began to set, the shadows of the trees grew longer, and the air turned colder quickly. I lit the fire, ate a simple dinner, and sat watching the flames crackle. That's when I noticed a flickering light in the distance, between the trees. It was the beam of a flashlight, someone walking. I watched for a while, but it didn't seem like it was heading toward me. I figured it was another camper exploring the area, and didn't think much of it. Still, something about the way the light moved, irregular, without any clear pattern, made me uneasy, like it wasn't just someone finding their way back to their campsite. After some time, the light disappeared, and the silence returned to the forest. I tried to convince myself I was overthinking it, and that there was nothing strange about it, but that feeling of unease lingered. I decided to extinguish the fire and retreat to my tent. I was tired from the hike and setting everything up, so I figured a good night's sleep would do me good. Inside the tent, as I settled into my sleeping bag, the wind began to move through the trees, making that low, constant sound that should have been relaxing. But that night, it felt different. There was something heavier about it, as if the wind was carrying some distant sound I couldn't quite make out. Despite the weight on my chest, I eventually fell asleep. I woke up suddenly, unsure of how much time had passed. The first thing I noticed was the sound of footsteps. It wasn't an animal, I was sure of that. These were light but deliberate footsteps circling my tent. My heart started pounding, and I froze completely, trying to listen more closely. Then I heard something even more disturbing. Whispers. Quiet, almost imperceptible, but definitely human. The problem was, it wasn't in English. I couldn't recognize the language, but it had a peculiar rhythm, almost like chanting. With trembling hands, I grabbed my flashlight and prepared to step out of the tent, even though every instinct was screaming at me to stay inside. With the flashlight in hand, I unzipped the tent slowly, trying to make as little noise as possible. My heart felt like it was in my throat, and every movement I made seemed far too loud in the surrounding darkness. When I finally looked outside, there was no one there. Just the towering trees, motionless under the faint glow of the moon, and my fire long extinguished. Still, something was different. Scattered on the ground near my tent were my belongings. My backpack, lunchbox, even my spare sleeping bag. Everything had been pulled out and thrown around haphazardly. My entire body went cold, but what really made me freeze were the marks on the trees around the campsite. Strange symbols, like letters or drawings I'd never seen before, carved into the bark. They were irregular, but there was something about them that felt deliberate. I knelt to grab my backpack, quickly checking if anything was missing, but everything was there, just tossed around. As I gathered my things, that horrible feeling of being watched crept over me. My instincts told me to glance over my shoulder every second, but I was terrified of what I might see. I decided to shine the flashlight on the symbols for a closer look, but that only made things worse. Some of them seemed fresh, with bits of bark still scattered at the base of the trees. Others, however, looked ancient, like they'd been there for years. The pattern seemed random, but as I stepped back, I realized they formed something larger. That's when it hit me. These symbols weren't here when I set up camp. The cold felt sharper now, and the darkness around me seemed to swallow everything beyond the weak beam of my flashlight. I knew I didn't have much time before fear completely paralyzed me, so I finished collecting my things and tried to think of what to do. Leaving in the middle of the night, without a clear path, felt more dangerous than staying. But staying meant confronting something unknown, something I couldn't even name. As I weighed my options, I heard the sound of snapping branches again, this time farther away, but still close enough to chill me to the bone. I turned toward the sound, but it was like staring into the void, nothing but darkness between the trees. Then came the whispers again, louder this time, and definitely closer. They weren't scattered like before. They came from one single direction, as if someone or something was approaching. The rhythm was the same, almost hypnotic, but there was an aggression in the tone now, like the words were meant for me. I knew I had to move, but my legs felt heavy, as if they were rooted to the ground. That's when I caught movement out of the corner of my flashlight. It wasn't clear, just a quick shadow between the trees, but it was enough to make me let out a muffled scream and instinctively step back. Whatever it wasn't trying to hide completely. It was toying with me. I ran faster than I ever had in my life, dodging low branches and feeling the wet leaves scraping against my face. My lungs burned, and the weight of my backpack seemed to double with every step, but I couldn't stop. The whispers were back, but now they were mixed with the sound of footsteps. They were stronger, more deliberate, as if they were running after me. The flashlight started flickering so badly that it finally died, leaving me in total darkness. I could only rely on the faint moonlight, which barely broke through the treetops. Suddenly, I tripped over something and hit the ground hard. When I looked up, my heart nearly stopped. A figure stood there, motionless, just a few feet away. I couldn't see its face, only the silhouette, but I knew it was staring at me. I froze for a few seconds, waiting for it to move, but the figure just stood there like it was studying me. I had no idea who or what it was. Then, without warning, the silhouette tilted its head slightly, almost like a gesture of curiosity or mockery, and began to move toward me slowly. That was all it took for me to get up and start running again, even though my leg throbbed from the fall. This time, I didn't think about direction or finding the trail back. I just wanted distance, anything to get away from that place. My feet pounded against the ground in a chaotic rhythm, but the sound of footsteps behind me didn't fade. For a moment, I was sure it was catching up to me. I don't know how long I ran or where I was going. My mind was focused solely on surviving, on getting away from whatever that presence was. Then I realized something strange. The sounds of the whispers and footsteps had stopped abruptly. The silence returned, but it wasn't normal silence. It was dense, almost tangible, like the entire forest was holding its breath. My instincts screamed at me not to stop, but my body was exhausted. I leaned against a tree to catch my breath, scanning the darkness with wide eyes, trying to see anything. That's when I noticed an opening between the trees, a faint light. Without thinking, I ran toward it, and to my surprise, I found the main trail. When I reached my car, the sun was just beginning to rise, painting the sky in shades of orange. I threw my backpack into the back seat, got in, and slammed the door shut, turning the key in the ignition. As I drove, I kept glancing at the rearview mirror, expecting to see something or someone emerge from the road behind me, but it was completely empty. Even now, as I write this, I can't fully understand what happened that night. The carvings on the trees, the whispers, the figure. It all felt so real, yet impossible to explain. I've never gone camping alone since. In fact, I don't think I'll ever step into a forest again. The only thing I know is that something was there with me, and whatever it was, it didn't want me to stay. I never imagined that a road trip to visit my parents could turn into the kind of story you read about on forums like this. But here I am, still trying to understand what happened that night. It was a rainy Friday, the kind of night that makes you want to stay home wrapped in a blanket. But I had decided to take a remote road to avoid traffic. I regret that decision to this day. I was alone, with the constant sound of rain hitting the windshield, and the forest on both sides of the road seemed to close in around me. The headlights reflected off the raindrops, sliding down the glass, and I drove slowly, worried about skidding. Everything seemed peaceful until I realized I had missed an important turn. The road was dark, there was no cell signal, and the only thing I could do was keep driving and hope to find a place to ask for help. After some time, I finally saw a faint light on the horizon, a flickering sign that read, "Diner." I sighed in relief and turned into the parking lot, which was almost empty except for an old truck and a motorcycle. The place looked like something out of an old movie, with red and blue neon lights reflecting off the puddles on the asphalt. As soon as I stepped inside, the warmth and the smell of stale coffee greeted me. But something about the place didn't feel right. The waitress gave me an overly cheerful smile, as if I were the first customer in years. "Welcome, sweetheart. Sit wherever you'd like," she said in a syrupy voice that didn't match the vibe of the place. I chose a table near the window, trying to ignore the stares from two men sitting at the counter. They murmured to each other, but stopped as soon as they realized I was looking. While I waited for the coffee, I ordered more to warm up than to drink. I glanced around to distract myself. The walls were covered in faded posters and old signs, as if time had frozen in the place. The rain outside seemed heavier now, and I wondered if I should wait it out before hitting the road again. The waitress returned quickly with the cup and placed it on the table with that same unwavering smile. "Do you need anything else, sweetheart?" she asked, but her tone had something off, as if it were too rehearsed. I said no, and she went back behind the counter, where she began whispering with the cook. That's when I realized the two men at the counter were still staring at me, but they looked away every time I tried to meet their eyes. After a while, I decided it was better to leave before the rain got worse. I went to the register to pay, feeling the piercing stares of the other customers on my back. The waitress wished me good luck, but her smile now felt almost mocking. As soon as I stepped out, the rain hit me hard, and I ran to my car, trying to ignore the growing sense that something was wrong. I got in, shut the door, and turned the key. Nothing. The engine sputtered and died. I tried again, but the result was the same. My heart started racing, and a thin layer of sweat formed on my forehead despite the cold. I glanced back at the diner, and the waitress was already at the door, as if she'd been waiting for this. She motioned for me to come back, and for a moment, every instinct in me screamed to ignore her and try the car one more time. But the rain was pouring, and its relentless hammering on the car roof amplified my sense of helplessness. I took a deep breath, opened the door, and ran back inside. "Your car didn't start, did it?" she asked before I could even say a word. Her smile was still there, but now it seemed sharper. "We can call a local mechanic. He lives nearby and should be awake." The idea made me uncomfortable, but I didn't have many options. I nodded, trying not to show the panic creeping into me. She picked up the phone behind the counter and made a quick call, speaking too quietly for me to hear. Meanwhile, I sat back down at the same table, now completely soaked. The rain outside seemed to drown out all the sounds inside the diner, except for the whispers of the staff. The cook, a burly man with a thick mustache, came out of the kitchen and began tidying up the counter, but his movements were slow, almost mechanical. He looked at me once, and only once, but that look stuck in my mind. It wasn't hostile, nor friendly. It was something else. Calculating. The waitress came back after a few minutes. "The mechanic said he's on his way, but it might take a while because of the rain," she explained, as if it were a trivial detail. I tried to smile back, but the feeling of being watched was unbearable. I decided I needed to step outside, even if just for some air. I got up under the pretense of going to the bathroom, but my real intention was to look for a way out through the back, or at least figure out what was going on. The hallway leading to the bathroom was narrow, with walls covered in faded yellow tiles and water stains on the ceiling. As I walked, The sound of the rain seemed to fade, and the silence inside was almost deafening. When I reached the bathroom, I pushed the door open but didn't go in immediately. I waited for a moment, listening. That's when I heard something that froze me. Muffled voices coming from the kitchen near the back door. "It's all set. The car is ready," someone said in a rough, hurried voice. My heart raced. Were they talking about my car? I stood completely still, straining to hear more, but the sound of footsteps approaching made me rush into the bathroom and shut the door quietly. I took a deep breath and looked around. The place was as run down as the rest of the diner, with a stained mirror and a constantly dripping faucet. But what caught my attention was a small window above the toilet. It was narrow, but it seemed like my only chance. Without thinking twice, I climbed onto the toilet and forced the window open. The cold, damp forest air hit me as I managed to squeeze through the window. I landed on the wet ground with a thud that echoed in the night, but I didn't have time to worry about the pain. I looked around, trying to get my bearings. The diner looked even more sinister from the outside, with its flickering neon sign and strange shadows cast by the rain. My car was parked just a few meters away, but something next to it caught my attention. An old truck with its engine running. The low rumble was almost drowned out by the rain, but the smoke coming from the exhaust was unmistakable. I crept closer, keeping my body low. That's when I saw it. The hood of my car was open, and the interior looked tampered with. Loose wires dangled as if someone had deliberately dismantled the system. My heart pounded so hard it felt like it might burst out of my chest. Whoever it was had set everything up to leave me stranded. At that moment, the diner door swung open. The light spilled onto the parking lot, and I dove behind a stack of old crates. I saw the waitress step out with an umbrella, looking directly at my car. Beside her, a tall, thin man in a dark leather jacket carried something that looked like a toolbox. For a few endless seconds, I stayed hidden behind the crates, trying to control my breathing. Every move felt too loud, even with the rain muffling the noise. The waitress and the thin man approached my car, and he began fiddling with the wires while she held the umbrella to shield him from the rain. "Are you sure this will work?" she asked, her voice firm and stripped of the syrupy tone she'd used before. "It'll work. She just needs to get in the truck," he replied, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. My stomach churned, and my body tensed. They were planning something. I looked around desperately for an escape route. The truck was running, but it was impossible to reach it without being seen. My car, in that condition, was useless. That's when I spotted a narrow dirt path at the edge of the parking lot, almost hidden by the trees and the darkness. It wasn't exactly a safe exit, but it was my only option. Waiting for the right moment, I stayed low and ran as fast as I could toward the path, not caring about the branches and mud clinging to my clothes. My only goal was to get as far away as possible. The darkness seemed to swallow me as I ran along the narrow path, the rain making everything more difficult. My hands slipped on tree trunks as I tried to keep my balance, and the mud felt like it was trying to hold me in place. My heart was in my throat, but I couldn't stop. I had no idea where the path led, but anywhere was better than staying near that diner. Then I heard something that froze my blood. Heavy footsteps behind me, mingling with the sound of the rain. They were following me. I picked up the pace, stumbling over an exposed root and nearly falling, but I forced myself to keep going. The trees around me seemed to close in with every step, and the air grew thicker. I turned back for just a second, enough to see a flashlight's beam bobbing between the branches, accompanied by muffled voices. They were getting closer. My mind raced as fast as my body, trying to figure out what to do. I couldn't run forever, and hiding seemed like a terrible idea with those lights. Then I saw it. A small wooden structure in the distance, almost camouflaged among the trees. It looked like an abandoned cabin, and without thinking twice, I ran toward it. When I reached the cabin, my legs were trembling, and my hands slipped on the rusty doorknob as I tried to open it. Thankfully, it was unlocked, and creaked loudly as it gave way, making my heart skip a beat. I stepped inside and closed the door behind me, holding my breath as I listened. The rain hammering on the cabin's roof seemed both a blessing and a curse. It masked the sound of my breathing, but also made it harder to hear if they were close. The interior was small, filled with old furniture covered in thick layers of dust. A strange smell lingered in the air, somewhere between mold and rust, but I didn't have time to think about it. I crouched behind an old wooden shelf, trying to hide from whoever was outside. That's when I heard the voices again. They were clearer now, and much closer. "She came this way," said the man, his voice low and gravelly, probably the same one who had tampered with my car. Another voice responded, this time a woman's, and I recognized it instantly. It was the waitress. "She won't get far. This forest swallows people like her." My blood ran cold. It wasn't just paranoia. They were really after me, and it seemed like this wasn't the first time something like this had happened. I held my breath as the flashlight beams passed through the gaps in the wooden walls, illuminating the cabin's interior intermittently. I closed my eyes, praying they wouldn't come inside. The flashlight beams lingered on the cabin for a moment, and I heard the heavy steps circling the outside. Every creak of the wood made me flinch, and I was certain they would come in at any second. But then, the man's gravelly voice broke the tension. "She can't be far, but she's not here. Let's keep moving." The woman mumbled something I couldn't make out, and their footsteps started fading into the rain. I stayed crouched behind the shelf, not daring to move for what felt like an eternity, just listening. The sound of the rain and my own heartbeat were the only things breaking the silence. When I finally felt brave enough to move, I carefully stood up and scanned the room. That's when I noticed something strange on the floor in the corner, scratches on the wood, as if something heavy had been dragged. Drawn by a mix of curiosity and desperation, I moved closer and found a small, improvised hatch. It looked hastily built, with mismatched planks of wood covering an opening. My gut told me this could either be a hiding spot or a trap, but I didn't have much of a choice. With trembling hands, I pulled at the planks, revealing a narrow, dark hole leading underground. The smell that wafted up was awful. Damp earth mixed with something metallic and putrid. But I had no time to hesitate. I climbed down, gripping the edges of the opening to steady myself, and pulled the hatch closed above me. The space below was cramped and suffocating, the walls made of packed dirt and stone. My breathing was shallow as I crouched in the corner, trying to make myself as small as possible. Above me, the footsteps returned. They were inside the cabin now, moving deliberately, searching. I froze, listening to their muffled voices. The man's voice was sharp and impatient. "She has to be around here somewhere. Check everything." I heard furniture being dragged, objects crashing to the floor. My chest tightened as I waited, terrified they'd notice the hatch. But after a few minutes of searching, the woman sighed. "Forget it. She's not here. If she's smart, she's already miles away." The man cursed under his breath, and their footsteps receded once more. Even then, I didn't dare move. I stayed in that suffocating space, curled into myself until I was sure they were gone. When I finally climbed out, the cabin was eerily silent, the rain still pattering softly on the roof. I peeked through the window and saw the diner in the distance, its lights now off. The truck was still parked in the lot, but the figures were nowhere to be seen. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, to run and never look back. I crept out of the cabin and made my way back to the dirt trail, sticking close to the shadows. My legs were weak, and every step felt like it would give out, but I pushed forward, the thought of escaping stronger than the exhaustion. After what felt like hours, I finally reached the main road. It was empty and dark, except for the faint glow of a distant gas station sign. I stumbled toward it, soaked and shivering, but filled with a small sense of hope. The old man behind the counter looked at me with concern as I told him what had happened. He handed me a hot cup of coffee and called the police without hesitation. While we waited, he said something that made my skin crawl. "That diner, I've heard stories. People who stop there don't always come back. The police arrived and took my statement, but as far as I know, they never found the people or my car. The diner, the truck, and the waitress were gone by the time they searched the area. To this day, I don't know what they wanted from me, and I don't think I ever will. I avoid lonely highways and remote diners now, but sometimes, when I'm alone at night, I still hear the rain and the sound of footsteps behind me. I've always been the type of person who enjoys exploring trails. I'm not an athlete or anything, but whenever I had free time, I liked to get out of the city and lose myself in nature. It was kind of therapeutic, you know? At the time, I was going through a rough patch in my life, fresh out of a relationship and needing an escape. While searching online for hidden trails, I stumbled across a state park that seemed perfect. It had great reviews, with people saying the place was beautiful and that the trails were easy, even for beginners. I decided to go the following weekend. I packed my backpack, wore some comfortable sneakers, grabbed a water bottle, and left early in the morning. My plan was to enjoy the whole day and get back before dark. I arrived at the park around 8 a.m. The parking lot was empty, which I thought was great because I really wanted some peace and quiet. There was a small wooden sign marking the beginning of the trail with basic instructions. Respect nature. Carry out your trash, the usual stuff. The trail started out just as I expected. Tall trees forming a natural tunnel, the sound of birds echoing, and the fresh smell of damp earth. It was exactly what I needed. But right from the start, something caught my attention. A pile of rocks neatly stacked by the side of the path. I found it curious, but I didn't think much of it. It's common to see these kinds of things on trails. People like stacking rocks as a marker or just for fun. I walked for about an hour at a leisurely pace, enjoying the quiet and snapping a few pictures with my phone. That's when I saw another pile of rocks, this one larger and more intricate. The stones were of different sizes, stacked almost artistically, as if someone had spent a lot of time perfecting them. I looked around, trying to imagine who might have done this, but the trail was completely deserted. What struck me as odd was that the rocks looked freshly placed, clean, without dust or moss, as if they'd been arranged that very morning. I kept walking, assuming it might just be a local tradition or the work of a regular visitor to the park. The trail began to narrow, and the environment around me subtly shifted. The trees grew denser, almost suffocating, and the air, once fresh, now felt heavy. That's when I saw something that made me stop in my tracks, a single shoe, abandoned in the middle of the path. Just one. It was muddy, but still relatively new. I thought maybe someone had accidentally lost it, but there was no sign of anyone nearby. I picked it up, glanced around, and left it where I found it. I kept walking, but an uneasy feeling settled in my chest. The once comforting silence now felt oppressive, like it was waiting for something to happen. After the shoe, things got weirder. I walked for a few more minutes and came across a water bottle. It wasn't an old, discarded bottle. It was one of those sturdy, insulated metal ones, well kept and free of rust or wear. It was sitting next to another pile of rocks, as if intentionally placed there. I picked it up, and it was empty. What unsettled me was the arrangement. Everything seemed deliberate, as though someone had set it up to draw attention. My heart started beating faster, and for the first time, I thought about turning back. But it didn't make sense. Nothing seemed dangerous, at least not yet. Maybe someone had just left their things behind by mistake, I thought. Still, I kept walking, now more on edge. About 20 minutes later, I stumbled upon something that made my breath catch, a phone. It was resting on top of another rock pile, screen down. I picked it up cautiously, trying not to think too much about how it ended up there. I pressed the button to turn on the screen, but nothing happened. It seemed dead. I stood there for a few seconds, staring at the trail, trying to make sense of what was going on. That feeling of being watched started to grow. It wasn't just paranoia. It felt like the environment itself had shifted. The wind that once rustled the leaves had stopped. The silence was now absolute, and it sent chills down my spine. I decided it was time to head back. I turned around, trying to recall the exact path I had taken, but something felt off. The trees all looked the same. The bushes had no distinct markers, and no matter how carefully I retraced my steps, I kept ending up in the same spot. After walking for about 10 minutes, I realized I was back at the same pile of rocks where the phone had been. I looked around, trying to stay calm, and thought, okay, maybe I just got mixed up. I'll try again. I picked another direction and started walking faster, but like some twisted déjà vu, I ended up in the exact same place. My breathing grew heavier, and my heart felt like it was going to explode out of my chest. It was as if the park itself was playing games with me. I decided to ignore the trail altogether and cut through the woods, hoping to find a shortcut and escape. But that only made things worse. The trees grew tighter together, their branches closing in around me like they were trying to trap me. I started hearing noises too, faint, light footsteps always behind me. Every time I turned around, there was nothing. But I knew something was there. You can feel it when you're not alone. After what felt like hours, I finally found a clearing. It was a small opening in the middle of the trees, illuminated by a faint light that I couldn't tell if it was coming from the sky or reflecting off the leaves. But something felt wrong about that place. The moment I stepped into the clearing, a shiver ran down my spine, like I had crossed some invisible boundary. In the center was another pile of rocks, larger than all the others I'd seen before. And there, tucked under one of the smaller stones, something caught my eye. It was a piece of paper, yellowed and frayed at the edges, like it had been there for a long time. I picked up the paper with trembling hands and carefully unfolded it. The message was simple, written in firm but hurried handwriting. Don't follow them. My stomach churned. Who were they? Up until that moment, I hadn't seen anyone, but the feeling of being watched was stronger than ever. My entire body was tense, like every muscle was preparing to run, even though I didn't know where the danger was coming from. I looked around, trying to make sense of the message, but the silence was crushing. Suddenly, a shadow flickered in the corner of my vision, making my heart almost stop. I whipped my head toward the shadow, but there was nothing there. Just the still trees, like silent witnesses to something I couldn't see. The message on the paper now felt more like a warning than a clue. I decided I couldn't stay there any longer. Even though I didn't know exactly where to go, I forced myself to move. The clearing had 3 apparent exits, but none seemed more inviting than the others. I chose the one on the right, trying to remember the sun's position to guide me, but the light seemed distorted, as if it wasn't coming from a fixed point. It was all so confusing that my legs started moving almost on instinct. As I followed the new path, I began to hear voices. They were faint at first, like whispers from far away, but gradually they grew clearer. They sounded like indistinct murmurs, like a conversation I couldn't quite make out. The voices seemed to come from all directions, but when I turned around, there was still no one there. The only sound accompanying me was the crunch of dry leaves under my feet. With each step, the voices grew louder, closer, and I started to make out a few words. Go back. Stay. Don't look. My heart was pounding in my throat, but I had no idea what to do. Stop? Keep going? I felt trapped in an endless nightmare. My head was spinning. The voices, now louder, seemed to blend with the sound of footsteps that weren't mine. It felt like something was following me, keeping a calculated distance, just enough for me never to see it. I started running, ignoring the trail, ignoring the branches that scratched my face and arms. All I wanted was to get out. My lungs burned, and my feet tripped over invisible roots, but I couldn't stop. Then I really did trip, falling face first into the ground. When I lifted my head, I realized I was back at the clearing, as if I'd been running in circles. The pile of rocks now looked different. The stones were no longer carefully stacked. They were scattered across the ground, as if something had passed through and knocked them over. In the spot where I had found the paper, there was something new now. A small fabric bracelet, the kind kids make with colorful knots. I picked it up, feeling the weight of something that made no sense. My mind screamed at me to leave, but my body felt frozen. That's when I heard footsteps, this time clearly coming from the woods. Slow, heavy, and getting closer. It felt like someone, or something, was heading straight for me. I didn't wait to find out what it was. My will to survive overpowered the fear that had paralyzed me, and I ran again, aimlessly. This time, I tried something different. I started marking the trees along the way, using a sharp rock to carve small lines into the trunks. If I ended up back at the clearing, at least I would know. Every step seemed to take me deeper into that living maze. The sound of footsteps behind me continued, now accompanied by a low buzzing, almost like a repetitive chant, but I couldn't understand it. My head throbbed, and the voices still echoed, as if they were trapped inside my skull. That's when I saw the light. Through the trees, a small beam, like an exit. I ignored everything, the exhaustion, the fear, even the marks I'd made on the trees, and ran toward it. When I arrived, I realized it was the park's parking lot. My car was there, exactly as I had left it. But before I could feel any relief, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The paper I had found in the clearing was now tucked under my windshield wiper. The same words, "Don't follow them." My entire body trembled. I got into the car, started the engine, and left as fast as I could. I got home that night with my heart still racing. I couldn't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I still hear the voices or feel that presence watching me. The paper is still with me, tucked away in a drawer. I've never told anyone about this until now, but I needed to get it off my chest. I don't know what happened in that park, but I know I'm never setting foot there again. And if you're thinking about visiting, the best advice I can give you is this: don't follow anything. Don't follow anyone.